lucky to be alive. So you're bringing it, the start of the year. You know you got nothing but cheer. Your family and your friends, they are so proud of you. It's time to start to do those things. The goals you set, the ones you call your dreams. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. You're born who you are. You change what you have to. You're born who you are. You can change if you have to. You're born who you are. You must change 'cause you want to. It's time to focus on your dreams. Put them off so long, they're there but can't be seen. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. Let's step up our game a bit and use those things we quit, and laugh and smile and say we're lucky to be alive. It's time to start to do those things. The goals you set, the ones you call your dreams. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. So you're bringing it, the start of the year. You know you got nothing but cheer. Your family and your friends, they are so proud of you. It's time to start to do those things. The goals you set, the ones you call your dreams. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. You're born who you are. You change what you have to. You're born who you are. You can change if you have to. You're born who you are. You must change 'cause you want to. It's time to focus on your dreams. Put them off so long, they're there but can't be seen. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. Let's step up our game a bit and use those things we quit, and laugh and smile and say we're lucky to be alive. It's time to start to do those things. The goals you set, the ones you call your dreams, but how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive.
Morning. Welcome to the Cassadaga Spiritualist camp and the Sunday morning Lyceum service. My name is Robin Matutino, and it is my pleasure to be introducing to you today's speaker, Reverend Steve Hermann. I want to tell you a little bit about Reverend Steve Hermann before I call him up. Steve is an international medium and healer. He is the author of the Mediumship Mastery, The Ultimate Guide, which he has books available with him if you're interested in talking to him about that. Steve is originally from Amherst, Massachusetts, but now lives in San Jose, California. And he will be having several events in the remainder of the time that he's here. I'm going to tell you just some high-level information about them, and then be sure to pick up the flyers for the detail in the message center, or welcome center. And so for tomorrow, Monday, March 15th, he's doing a workshop called Mediumship Mastery from 7 to 9 p.m. here in this building. He'll be doing Beyond Seance Message Circle on Saturday the 20th from 7 to 9 here in this building. Animal Totems and Symbols, Sunday the 21st. That's not mine. I'm sorry. Wrong person. And let's see, we have Learn to Do Mediumship, reading us in 6 easy steps. That'll be Monday the 22nd. That'll be held in the Slater House. And also, Let's Have a Seance on Tuesday, March the 23rd from 7 to 9. So you can see Steve is going to be very busy while he's here. And I encourage everyone to take an opportunity to meet him in person. And without further ado, let me bring him up and let him speak to you. Good morning.
Well, good morning. It's so nice to see all of you here. How many of you had difficulty dragging yourselves out of bed? And of course, the clock over here, it's still 8:30. And actually, it's interesting because I've been coming here in Cassadaga. I've been over 30 years. And actually, this is the first time I've ever done Lyceum before. So usually, I'm always doing the service on a Sunday, but this is the very first time. And it's interesting because there's actually more people here in the spirit world than there are physically. Isn't that true? How many of you are able to actually sense the spirits around us? And I'll tell you, here in Cassadaga, this particular building, the Andrew Jackson Davis building, all of Cassadaga is a vortex. It's a residue for the spirit power that's been used, if we go back last way over a century. But this particular space, the energy is really incredible. And I can think of so many years doing workshops here. Or even, I've been at different years ago, I remember doing sessions here. They didn't have anywhere else to put me, so they put me in here. And it's interesting because, you'll be here doing sessions and people will walk in, and if they're especially lazy about trying to find a medium, if they know that you're actually in this building, you'll get all sorts of people coming to you. And sometimes that's really interesting. I often joke that there's a fine line between being psychic and psychotic. So when you get into this, of course you really want to be balanced, but the spirit world is literally all around us. And we think about the month of March, of course, we think about March 31st. And what is March 31st? It's the anniversary of the Spiritualist movement. Of course, the communication between the physical world and the world of spirit, that's always taken place, hasn't it? If we go back historically, all through the ancients, all these different cultures, different civilization, there was spirit communication that was taking place. But what happened in upstate New York with the Fox sisters, right? The rapping, these types of... Has anyone ever heard spirit phenomena like that? How many of you would be flipped out by that? These... Who's there? Maybe it even gets louder. Sometimes it's not always that loud. It could be... But you'll hear it with your physical ears. Now, I was told, and maybe they're even watching on Zoom right now, don't talk about the Fox sisters. We've had too many talks about the Fox sisters lately. And, people don't want to hear it. So we're not going to talk about the Fox sisters. I'm really a bit bored myself with the Fox sisters. Because a lot of times in March, all these people will talk about the Fox sisters. And who were the Fox sisters? Well, the Fox family lived in a cottage. A murdered peddler who allegedly was buried in the basement communicated, through the rapping phenomena. It's a type of mediumship. And if you go here in Cassadaga and you have a consultation, a session, or a sitting with a medium, are they going to work with rapping noise? Probably not. You'd probably flip out. Or at least a lot of people would. So it's really not the physical mediumship that's taking place. It's the mental mediumship. You go to a service here. Someone like myself will stand up and telepathically will receive communications from the spirit world. But if we go back to 1848, and if we proceed into the 1850s, we see that people are really interested in the communication. I mean, in all walks of life, from people who are very uneducated, just the masses of people. And we have to remember that education wasn't as prevalent. People might have studied to a certain point when they're 12 and then they give it up. So the literacy wasn't there. But you had people, upper classes who were more affluent and more educated, more culturally aware. They were also into it. And it spread all over the United States. And Maria Hayden, she was a medium. She went to England in 1852, and it spread there. And went to continental Europe, and went everywhere. Kind of like the way the virus was spreading. But the difference is it was something very positive, because people who for years, they've been brought up, religious indoctrination, this is the way things are, right? They read, from a Christian background, if we go to Europe or the States, Canada, right? We have the Old and New Testament. It's written in stone. How many of you have ever in your life believed everything that's in the Bible literally? Have any of you come from that type of background? A lot of people do. See, some people are nodding. Nothing, no judgment there. But someone can be brought up, really devout, really good person. They work on their morals, their ethics, their spiritual character. But then when it comes to this whole question about life after death, they don't necessarily have a clue. There's no conviction there. And then maybe someone close to them passes over, and it's really, on a human level, obviously, it's going to be really devastating. So with spiritualism, when it became very, 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 big, when it became prevalent and spread all over the place, it answered that type of question, because someone could go to a seance with a medium. Hopefully the medium wasn't too whacked out, but, a legitimate medium. And they have rapping noises. They hear what they're saying. And, it's not like, you're cracking your knees, joints somehow. Are any of you able to crack your knuckles? How many of you can crack your knuckles? You don't want to do it. It would be irritating to hear. You don't want to. But how many of you can crack your knees or your toe joints? But this is what people were theorizing. Oh my gosh, these girls, the Fox sisters, they're cracking their knees. Now I'll tell you this. If one of you were able to crack your knees, I think we would know that you were doing it, don't you think? Even if we turned off all the lights, we were in the dark or semi-darkness. So sometimes people who are very skeptical, they'll go back because they doubt this stuff, right? They think it's just a bunch of bunk. And they'll look at these examples, they'll examine examples of mediumistic phenomena historically, and they'll think, oh, well, this person must have been completely fraudulent. And they'll come up with all these possible explanations that are completely different than what actually was taking place, which was communication with the spirit world. But this phenomena spread all over the world, and the spiritualist movement started. And of course, many of the people who were involved in spiritualism, prior to spiritualism, they were involved with mesmerism. Does anyone know what mesmerism is? Does anyone know what hypnosis is? Who wants to come up here and act like a chicken? Or will pretend you're drunk and you're driving your car? I mean, have any of you ever been to like a hypnosis entertainment show? Now, when people think of hypnosis, a lot of times that's what they think of. And really, hypnosis is we're dealing with altered states of consciousness, and if you get into it, it's all about healing, and it can really be applied in a therapeutic context for so many different conditions of thinking, right? Patterns of thinking can be reprogrammed. They chew their knuckles or their nails. Hopefully no one here does that. But, or we have some phobia. You're afraid of being in an elevator with lots of people. Maybe you're afraid of public speaking. You're a student medium here in Cassadaga. And your teacher is demanding, insisting that you get up here and have to give messages. Now, some of you would be really frightened about that. But if you went to someone who's working with hypnosis, they could put you in this very receptive state, talk to your open, receptive, unconscious mind, and your behavior, oftentimes, just after one session would completely change. So people were into mesmerism. Franz Anton Mesmer, right? He was the father of hypnosis, but he was touring, working with many affluent people, if we go back into the 1700s in Europe, and his teachings were very popular with people, if we go into the 1800s, on both sides of the Atlantic. And they were dealing with altered states of consciousness, putting a person into a trance state. Now, when you're in the trance state, what happens? You dissociate from the body, and you're open. Your mind is open in the sense that the analytical aspect isn't there. So if you're an engineer, you need to have an analytical mind. Actually, you need to always have an analytical mind. You don't want to get rid of it. But when it comes to mediumship, mental mediumship at least, you need to be able to work with your intuitive mind. And people got into the phenomena, right? Table tipping. They placed their hands on a table, not necessarily even a lightweight table, but a heavy table. How many of you have, I'm sure a lot of you, this older furniture, and it's really very heavy. Can you imagine that moving? Vibrating? Now I work, as a mental medium, physical medium, all these things I'm involved in. And there's different vibrations involved depending how you're working with the spirit world. Now there's also, when it comes to physical phenomena, a lot of fraudience, a lot of delusions. You can put, there's all sorts of tricks that you can do. I knew this one magician once, and he would do like these kids' magic shows for birthday parties, things like this. But he had this library of all these magic books. I remember there's this whole encyclopedia of stage magic, and one of the volumes was just on spirit phenomena. There's a whole volume on how to do fake phenomena. Now I know if I had a seance, I could probably employ, if I paid some of you well enough, to wear some type of glow-in-the-dark sheet. How many of you would like to do that? You come out. There's this one medium once, and she had, these little kids, her children, who were quite young, and she'd have the seance. It was in the dark. Actually, she might have used the red light a bit too. But anyway, in the seance, she'd have these spirit children materialize. This trap door would open. Her children, would dance around the room. They'd sit in people's laps. And these people were completely gullible about it. Now, if we go back, there were people that did get involved in the spiritualist movement that were not genuine. And of course, when you have people that aren't genuine doing things, and they're exposed, they end up hurting people, it really kind of ruins it. It's just like if you go to an attorney and the attorney's really sleazy. Have any of you ever met a lawyer that's not honest? That would or you go to a dentist, and the dentist just, tells you have cavities and you don't. I knew this one lady many years ago in Washington, D.C., when I used to live there. And when she was a little girl in North Carolina, the dentist, just to make money, would tell kids, to the parents, these kids, they've got all these cavities. That's an excuse to put in fillings. And the kids didn't even need it. So if you had that kind of bad experience, it would literally tarnish your whole view of that particular profession, wouldn't it? And that's what happens with mediumship. There's many people who, if they hear about spiritualism, if you talk about mediumship, you talk about Cassadaga, they're thinking, oh my God, those people must be fakes. They must be con artists. But we see this movement spread all over the world. And very intelligent people got involved, if we go back, from 1848 onward. People who risked their career, their reputation, and they investigated it. They thoroughly checked out what was taking place. Now, granted, there would have been a lot of gullibility, and that there would have been people who were doing things. And I know there are mediums who were doing things that really wasn't genuine. But the emphasis at that time was the physical phenomena. So, we have the rapping type of mediumship. And of course, we have the table tipping, which is very cumbersome. as a form of communication, but you can feel the power. It's different than if you're just telepathically receiving communications from the spirit world. You can literally feel, you could just have your hands on the table, and the table might not be moving at all, literally. There's really no physical movement, but it's as if there's this force that's moving up from the ground. Let's say it's the wooden floor here in this space, all the way up through the wood of the table, through the table legs, all the way up, and you can feel it. And then the table will start to vibrate, but it's not even moving yet, but it feels like it's moving. And you'll feel the energy as an individual participating with this in your solar plexus area. And if we get into mediumship, we work with the chakras, right? We work with the energy centers. And different types of mediumship involve different rates of energy or vibration, or the different chakras are utilized. So, let's say you go to a session with a medium, right? They might be working with clairvoyance, right? They're able to see. They can discern all the angel loved ones. This type of, they're working with their third eye. How many of you have a third eye? You're just like Cyclops, but you can see spirit, right? And this is natural, but it's this fast, very upbeat type of energy when you connect in with it. See, mental mediumship is a very fast vibration, and when you start to work with it, it affects your entire central nervous system. It's as if on an inner level, physiologically, all the bodily systems, they all go into the fight or flight. Everything speeds up. And you'll see this. I know when I work, I tend to work very, very, very quickly, because I get the information very quickly. Now, physical mediumship, it's working with your solar plexus area, right? So sometimes you'll have someone go to a seance, right? They're going to go here in Cassadaga. How many of you have been to a seance here, like a physical type thing? See, some of you are raising your hands. Now, can you imagine? I'm a vegetarian, so I wouldn't eat this stuff. But let's say someone eats a steak dinner and potatoes. The heaviest possible dinner, and they go, or maybe they go to the hotel across the street, right? They have some Italian food. It's like really heavy and rich, weighing them down, their entire digestive systems filled up. And then they go to the seance. How do you think they're going to feel? Because I'll tell you, they draw the energy from here. Now, those of you women who are here, I don't know how many of you are mothers, but when you were pregnant, you probably experienced morning sickness. And if you want to recollect, how that actually felt, right, the nausea. So with physical mediumship, people feel like their guts are being, literally it can be churning. So certainly if someone went to a seance and they had eaten all this food, really weighed themselves down, they're going to feel that. But when we have the physical mediumship, seeing is believing. So someone, if we go back into the 1850s, this period, they've been brought up their entire life, black and white, literal, biblical interpretation of the Bible, right, the Christian scripture. And maybe they start to study science, because at that time you had a lot of more materialistic-oriented philosophies in Europe that certainly spread to the States that really questioned this literalism that was common with theology at the time. And there was really a conflict, a clash that was going on here in terms of thinking. So someone who was more scientifically oriented, who possibly was questioning or even rejecting the biblical, the way things were being presented in terms of theology. Well, if they actually go to a seance, right, they have interaction with a medium, what was being presented in spiritualism? It would actually demonstrate, right, intellectually, when they experienced the phenomena. So someone could be a doubting Thomas, right, and they touched the hem of the garment. So this is really what the purpose of phenomena is about. The problem with phenomena is that people get into it as a form of entertainment. Just like if we have fireworks, and some of you probably like fireworks, 4th of July, right, everything blows up. I remember when I was little, I liked to play with matches. So I had all these toy soldiers and I'd set them on fire. Did any of you do things like that? I'd take a G.I. Joe, you name it, it was pretty crazy. Set these big fires, firecrackers, things like that. So it's kind of, in a moment, in a temporary level, It's really, really, really pretty awesome to see explosions blow things up. But, after that, it's like you get bored, or what's the point of it after you do it for a short time? Unless you're really addicted, and that's something different. We don't want anyone to be a pyromaniac. But when it comes to this phenomena, the idea is really to awaken people, to connect them with themselves, to connect them with God, to make them aware that there's more to physical plane life than just what we're experiencing here through our limited 5 physical senses. And really, what was good about the physical mediumship that took place, if we go into the 1850s, is that it brought so many people into this. And as I was saying, people in a general sense were not as educated. So the phenomena served a purpose. You would have families that would get together. They would have home circles, right? Families and close friends. And of course, if you have families and close friends sitting for mediumship, let's say you're doing it a couple nights a week, are the conditions going to be harmonious? Hopefully, unless it's a really dysfunctional family. But there's going to be this energy there that builds up. So we have, the wrapping mediumship. They'd work with the ectoplasm. How many of you have seen ectoplasm before? How many of you believe in ectoplasm? Now, it's not like the Ghostbusters, is it? But there's people, sometimes I'll run into people when I'm teaching mediumship, and I go all over the place, all over the world, and they just think, that just sounds like it's nonsense. Like, what the heck? It sounds really crazy. And, you look at some of these older photographs, sometimes in some spiritualist books, they have these photographs in action, mediums in action. And, these people, they're contorted, their faces, they're like falling off the chair practically, and the stuff is coming out their nostrils, out of their mouth. What is that, cheesecloth or some type of yucky stuff, weird substance? And they just think, that must just be the person's, regurgitated cheesecloth, right? Or they've swallowed a sheet and they're spitting it up. But really, ectoplasm, if someone is a physical medium, right, it's all based on the psychic force, the chemistry of the medium, that they're able to generate to produce the phenomena, which is quite amazing when it takes place. And really, in a lot of, if you're having a session with a medium, let's say it's physical mediumship, it's not just the physical medium who's involved. It's everyone's involved with this. And really, you want harmony. Just at the service that we're going to be having later here this morning for Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp, we're going to be having singing. Why do we have singing? Because scientifically, the singing, right, it expands your energy field. It raises the vibration. Everything in the spirit world is at a much higher, faster frequency of energy. So they literally have to lower their rate of vibration to connect with us. So of course the singing harmonizes the energy. And that's important with any type of mediumship, right? Whether it's the mental or telepathic mediumship where they impress the information into our minds, right? And so of course with mental mediumship, the mind of the medium is completely involved in the process. But with the physical mediumship, it's objective. All of your physical senses are involved. You can videotape it. If you go back, obviously they didn't have video recorders. They weren't able to do that if we go back into the 1800s. But they would work and produce this phenomenon, right? Where they take the ectoplasm, put it over the face of the medium, and then transfigure, mold, sculpt the features of your grandmother, and you'll see her with your physical eyes. Everyone will see the face of your grandmother. Or they'll even literally be able to materialize full form of an individual who's kicked the bucket, and here they are. They've materialized. Now that sounds a bit far-fetched, doesn't it? But this is the type of phenomena that was taking place. And because of that phenomena that all started with the Vox sisters, it really helped greatly spread the spiritualist movement everywhere. So if we go into the 1850s, millions of people were involved in this. Abraham Lincoln, right? There's a seance room in the White House. He used to consult mediums. Both czars of Russia, before the communist revolution, if we go back into 1917, they were involved with mediums, right? Mary Pepper Vanderbilt, she was an American medium. She had a church in Brooklyn. She was the president of Lake Pleasant Spiritualist Camp, which is one of the meccas of spiritualism in Western Massachusetts. An early camp just like Cassadaga. She was also the president of Camp Etna up in Maine, if we go back into the World War I era. And the Tsar of Russia, in 1906, had her go and hold seances in St. Petersburg. So many of the European royalty regularly consulted mediums. Queen Victoria had her own mediums. President Grant, after Lincoln, he used to work with Maud Lord Drake, who was also a very famous medium if we go back. She worked all over the country. And a lot of these older mediums, if we go back to that period, where do you think they went in the winter? They went here. A lot of them had cottages here. A lot of them here, they'd come. They were. If we look at the older programs, if we look at the history of Cassadaga, it was a winter retreat for spiritualists. There were a good 50 or so camps like this around the country. Some of them are still around, that actually function as spiritualist camps. I travel all over the place with mediumship, and I've worked at so many different spiritualist camps, and it's kind of sad because some of the places, if I go back, 25, 30 years ago that were around, are no longer in existence. Just for one reason, due to incompetence or whatever, they're no longer functioning. But if we go back, there were these camps taking place. And of course, Cassadaga was really a nice place to go. I think anyone in the north back then, it would be cold and freezing, or up in Canada somewhere, or the state, somewhere in Michigan. So they would come here in the winter, and if they were into spiritualism, this place was a vortex, right? It was an energy. Whole families would come here. And they would spend, a couple weeks. And you would have social activities, but you would also have spiritual activities. And you would have these seances. And really, we have these spiritualist centers, right? We have churches. Sometimes it's a bit organized, like in a religious context. But really, the essence of spiritualism are these circles that oftentimes informally meet in people's homes, right? In their residence. So if we go back here in Cassadaga, a lot of these homes were owned by mediums. And many of these homes probably had their own seance room. And we can only imagine over the decades, the energy that would build up. Or maybe some of the mediums who actually would work, not just doing seances for the general public, but would do sessions for people who would come. And we see this to this day. People will drive here from nowhere. They don't know where they are. They get lost. They show up at Cassadaga. They have a session with a medium. I know all of you have had sessions with the mediums, haven't you? Has anyone not gone to a medium before? And you sit in their space, and there's this energy that's present. So that's been taking place here in Cassadaga for years. But these types of camps, if we go back into the 1800s, right, the 1870s and 80s, a lot of different Christian denominations in the summer months would hold camps. And religious meetings. Sometimes it was just for a day or two over the weekend, maybe a week long. So the spiritualists ended up doing the same thing, and many of them became permanent, year-round communities. So this Cassadaga really has been a center of spiritualism. Wow, way over a century, right? Since 1894, when it was actually established as a spiritualist camp. But many, many, many of the great mediums actually worked in this place. And we see, if we go to Europe, there's so many different spiritualist groups there. And they really, as a whole, don't have, if we go to continental Europe, that the format, the structure is very different than what you'd find here in the States. They're not modeled after Protestant-style churches with services. There's not clergy, but they're like centers, with a few exceptions. If we go to like Finland or Sweden, Iceland, some of these types of places. And it's wonderful because so many people there are actually interested in this. And really the history of what took place is, because spiritualism is like this tree that's so many different branches that literally has covered the entire planet with this higher understanding that there is no death and that there are no dead. And that's really the whole purpose behind this. So the phenomena type of aspect that was really very, 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 very important to spread spiritualism around the world. We see in the present age, so many people are becoming interested in physical phenomena. How many of you are interested in that? How many of you would be scared if you experienced it? Now, are we supposed to open this up for questions and this type of thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's because this is a lyceum. It's supposed to be like a Sunday school. That's the equivalent. But are there any questions? And don't be shy. Yes.
You talked about President Lincoln.
Yes.
Of course, the Civil War, we lost, over 600,000 people. So what I'm getting at is the families, who lost loved ones, would they be involved in this at that period of time?
I was reading this one book. It's called A Southerner Among the Spirits. And it came up by this. She's a very famous author. She had authored a lot of, non-fiction works and fiction works. But she spiritualism. Now, I believe she was from Dallas, Texas. And that area, Fort Worth, Dallas. And she went up north. This is back in the 1870s. And she was like New York City. She went to Vermont outside of Rutland. And there was the Eddy family. They had a farm. And they held physical seances there. So she stayed there for a number of weeks. I believe it was 1875, about that year. Anyway, and she went to Boston. But she was all over the place. And Washington, D.C., and she visited. She participated in seances. And remember, at that time, a lot of it was mainly physical types of seances that were going on with phenomena. So anyway, why I'm talking about that, you're asking about the Civil War. One of the people working with her, and he was not related to her, but he was a Confederate, a gentleman who had fought for the Confederacy, who had passed over in that particular conflict, and he repeatedly came through different mediums. Now, what's really good about this book is called A Southerner Among the Spiritualists, and it's out of print, but it's been reprinted. You print on demand. You can purchase it on Amazon, and in this particular book, it really documents her sessions she had, as well as these more larger group seance sessions that she had with some very prominent mediums at that time. And I think some of the stuff she saw was kind of probably complete. One seance, for example, was George Washington's birthday in February. George Washington himself, materialized. Now, I'm not so sure about that, quite frankly, because she wasn't that experienced, so she probably was very easily duped by some of these things. But if you're interested in really getting a feel for what was taking place, I highly recommend that. And of course, if we go back to the Civil War, just like the First World War too, families, their son, their husband, their father, they end up passing over, they're severely wounded. You had whole families that probably, back then, people had, in a general sense, probably would have more kids. And you can imagine there are probably families that lost all their kids. So many women who were widowed, by the situation. So there was an interest in mediumship, and of course we have this pandemic going on. But if we go back into that period, the types of physical disease that would take place that are no longer are prevalent the same way. So death was something that really was a lot more obvious to people. It was something that people really would have had to. Couldn't be in denial of it quite the same way as people are now.
The name of that book again?
It's called A Southerner Among the Spirits. And I'm trying to think of her name offhand, but anyway, if you look that up online, you'll be able to find it. And she published quite a few, she was an author, pretty well known. But any other questions? Right over here.
I study science and mind.
Yes.
It's a new thought.
Yeah, Ernest Holmes,
Right. Is spiritualism under the New Thought umbrella?
Well, really what happened is, if we go back into, I'm not sure, is this picking up people's questions too? Mm-hmm. Oh, good. Okay, because I wasn't sure. All right. So if we go back into the 1800s, you had the Spiritualist movement, and it spread all over the place. Now, a lot of people don't feel comfortable with mediumship. In fact, the problem with spiritualism, a limitation of spiritualism, is sometimes people get so much into the phenomena that they don't really get into the self-growth. They don't really get into these metaphysical aspects of self-improvement and healing. And they don't even get into the spirituality. You just go, hey, I just want to see the table tip. And that doesn't make you spiritual. That doesn't improve your morals or, your ethics, your personal character. Now, Ernest Holmes, and a lot of what we see with the New Thought churches, like, for example, Mary Baker Eddy, do you know what she was involved with before she started Christian Science? She was into spiritualism, right? She's a medium, right? Quimby, he had like the mind cure. He was up in Maine. So she's in Boston, New England. And she started her own cult. She started her own system of healing. So there were similar people that were, getting different ideas and, how to use the mind, right? How to work with the mind for healing yourself, but also working with other people and healing them, right? We can send prayers to people at a distance. So thinketh the man, that's what he becomes, right? So thoughts are things. So Ernest Holmes, Science of Mind, Unity Church, right? Church of Religious Science, Ernest Holmes. You have, there's quite a few other offshoots, just like spiritualism has a lot of different offshoots. You have the same thing with the New Thought, but really, it's almost, I had this one in Onset, Massachusetts. In Onset, it's an early spiritualist camp, just like Cassadaga. It's in Massachusetts on Cape Cod. And I had this lady come to me for a session. And she goes, at the end, she goes, I'm a Unity minister. And she pastored this Unity church in Cape Cod. This is going back about 30 years ago. And she says, I used to study at this church. Back in 1970, I was a student of Gladys and Kenneth Custance. Does anyone know Gladys and Kenneth Custance? Now, we just walked down a couple houses. They owned that house. And they came here, and, they would be in Onset during the summer, during the winter, summer, and then they come here in the winter. And they were here for years. Kenneth just passed away. Maybe it was like 20 years ago or so. He's about almost close to 100. And they studied with him. But when she came to her time for ordination as a Unity minister, they just said, well, we don't feel comfortable with the spiritualism. Keep them, we'll ordain you, but just keep the mediumship out of it. So some people, I don't think they're necessarily opposed to spiritualism or mediumship, although in some cases possibly, but they really just don't feel comfortable with it. But, the metaphysical aspects, they're really going to get, with the New Thought. And one thing that New Thought is very good that's often, sadly, is lacking in spiritualism is the emphasis on how to constructively work with your mind. There was a very, very powerful teacher and medium here in this camp. And you know what she used to teach? Natural law. Eloise Page. How many of you knew Eloise Page? I remember working, this is going back probably 20 years ago at one time. I was doing one of the Wednesday services here when I was visiting. And, Eloise, we did it together. And very old-time style, mediumship, which is what I like. It's what it's about. Bringing through, the evidence of survival and really being able to connect with spirit. But she was into teaching natural law. There's only really one law, right? The law of God. But there's all these different components. And sometimes in New Age circles, you hear about the law of attraction, this type of thing. Now, Kenneth and Gladys Custance, they used to do a lot of work. They'd go to New York, and at Carnegie Hall, Emmett Fox used to have a church. Who knows who Emmett Fox was? Right? And so he was all, the New Thought, using your mind. He used to do stuff in Onset, too. They were friends. And the more someone can integrate that into the spiritualism, it's not a conflict. And really, someone who's into New Thought, it's only going to enhance their understanding of working with natural law if they work with mediumship. Same thing if someone's a Buddhist, they're Christian, maybe they're Islamic. If you get involved with spiritualism, it's going to improve your life. And you don't have to give up what you're into. But yes, over here.
Well, what I found out, because I grew up in a very not fundamental because it was charismatic, but it was that sort of mix. And what I found was that because Edgar Casey was right down the road from us, and the way that they associated and spoke about Edgar Casey, you could tell, I found out as I grew older, that in the Christian experience, it was a matter of interpretation. If they don't know what a spiritualist does, then it's outside, so it's not good. The more they get to know what a spiritualist and a medium does, the more they can integrate it into their understanding of God. So that's what I found, was that it was more in a way in which it was interpreted by churchgoers. And once they knew more about spiritualism, the more they naturally would be able to marry it with their Christian beliefs.
This is totally true, because so many people, I mean, I can think of just I remember I was just down here in Harmony Hall. This is going back, I don't know, 20 years ago, something like this. This guy shows up for a session, and he goes, I'm a Roman Catholic priest in Orlando. I want a session. And he's really into it. Now, I've done, mediumship presentations in very mainstream, conventional Christian churches. And the clergy running these churches were like really into it. Whether it's Methodist or Congregational, it's so you're going to find that. And the other thing is this is interpretation of the charismatic movement, which is both in Protestantism as well as the Catholic. They're into the gifts of the Spirit. So sometimes the interpretation or the word, the terminology, how things are worded, will vary, but really it's the same phenomena that takes place. But spiritualism is scientific. What's very good about it is when it comes to development is we understand, in terms of natural law, the conditions that have to be there. If you're going to actually have communication. So a lot of what I do with mediumship, it's teaching mediumship. So if it all functions. You have to, the mechanics have to be there the right way. We talk about having harmony, right? Having cohesiveness, raising the vibration. And with some of that physical mediumship, for example, let's just say we're going to have some type of session. And you, sir, you hated her guts. Or this woman over here, she just thinks it's a bunch of bunk. Now, nothing wrong with that, but if she brings it in, that type of energy, it's not conducive to produce the type of phenomena, right? Because the spirit chemists, the individuals who specialize in this in the spirit world, they're not going to be able to do very much. It's going to create a limitation. Isn't this true? But what are any of you people who are new? Do you guys have any questions? Don't be shy.
I have a question.
Yes.
The Christian, having become a spiritualist or spiritist, okay, both, okay. In my experience, in finding where I belong in the spiritualist churches, and also unity and new thought, I can't fit in any particular.
Well, you don't want to.
There's a division, it seems, with the Christian spiritualist and then the spiritualist church.
Well, spiritualism is a tree, and it's got a lot of branches on it. So if we go into Christianity, how many thousands and thousands of denominations of Christianity are there? I'm part of the National Spiritualist Association of Churches, which is the oldest, most conservative. This camp used to be part of it. If we go back, a lot of churches were part of it, and it's very fundamental, pure spiritualism, a certain approach, really not so Christian oriented, this type of thing. And if you go back, there's been so many schisms, so many groups in either individual churches or even whole sections that have left where there's different organizations started. Because people have different ways of doing things. It's not wrong with that. So with spiritualism, we have, let's say the way things are in Cassadaga. Now, if you go to other spiritualist organizations or groups, sometimes the approach is a bit different. It's like I was talking about in Europe. Like, for example, if you go to a spiritualist center in Sweden or Iceland or Finland, someplace like this, very, very, very different. Go to the UK. It's different in the UK. Even if you go to like Scotland and Wales, it's different. There's variations in it. You go to some spiritualists, for example, they call themselves Christian spiritualists. Now, spiritualism, the difference would be is they place a lot of emphasis on some of the external aspects of Christian worship, maybe more so than what you'd find in other places. Go to California, they might be wearing like aluminum foil. They're channeling aliens and stuff. They mix all this weird New Age stuff into it. There's a lot of places too, they'll call themselves like metaphysical churches, and really, they'll use that terminology. Why? Because it doesn't scare people, right? People aren't frightened by it. But really, or maybe they can bring in some other metaphysical teachings into it that aren't commonly presented in spiritualism. So spiritualism is universal. We see the teachings of the very, very prominent and very famous French spiritualist who wrote under the pseudonym Allan Kardec. So his works, he had 5 classic works. Those were translated from the French into Spanish. They were translated into Portuguese. And if you go to a lot of Spanish-speaking countries internationally, they're spiritualist centers. You call it spiritism, same thing. except it's just the structure is a bit different. How it's expressed. There's a lot of emphasis on the higher philosophy and the development of character. In Brazil, there's literally tens of millions of people involved in spiritualism, which is called Spiritism. Same thing. It's the same movement that we go back to March 31st in upstate New York. And spiritualism is not a retirement hobby. So if you go to these places, it's not just all these people where 55 is young and everyone's elderly, they're about to kick the bucket. It's actually, whole families involved. And the emphasis is not just on phenomena. I do a lot of work in the Philippines, for example, thousands of spiritualist centers. And you go there, so many, they have these youth groups with thousands of people involved, teenagers, people in their 20s, this type of thing. It's not just this thing where everyone's old and with a cane and they're a medium. With spiritualism, it's relevant to all different ages, so to speak. And we're going to have to bring this to a close now because we're going to have the service. But I'm going to be around for to the 24th, so definitely come to any of my programs, and it's a great blessing to be able to be here and to serve Spirit. So God bless all of you.
I know a man who's always expecting a prize. And I know a man who thanks the sun when it's on the rise. I know a woman who keeps her dreams locked in a tin. And I know a woman who dances in four directions. And your eyes shining brighter, your heart feeling lighter, and your ego getting smaller, like the loosening of a collar, and your purpose getting clearer, spirit family drawing nearer. I know a mountain that gets taller the higher you climb. And I know a poem that gets longer the more than you rhyme. I know a dream that gets bigger the more you believe. And I know a bridge that gets stronger the more that you breathe. And your eyes shining brighter, your heart feeling lighter, and your ego getting smaller, like the loosening of a collar, and your